So yeah, welcome everyone to the April Tableau user group. I will be speaking most of the time, joined by my co-leaders of the user group, Kent, Kristen, and Jeremy. And I have asked them explicitly to share their opinions or thoughts as they roll in. I'll be covering quite a bit of information today, and it may come out in no particular order as we work through the tabs across the bottom of the screen. But my intent is to first talk about a couple of the new features that came out in 2020.1 or 2021.1. Whoops. One of my favorite things to do, which is blame the server for anything bad that happens in your workbook. Talk about some of the general tips that I like to follow when building inside of Tableau, and then talk about some of the tips around organizing your data source to help optimize the speed and operations inside of your workbook. Oh, I guess, of course, the topic of today's talk being the optimization of speed inside of our workbooks. How do we get these things to run as fast as we can to create that good first impression with a client? When people go in and they click on something and it doesn't work as fast or as reactive as they'd like it to, you can lose a lot of confidence from your users really quickly. And so these are just the first places that I look when I'm either building a new workbook or reinventing one. So some of the things to think about moving forward. So there, of course, as I always shamelessly plug, is the virtual event calendar out there. And I have a link to that on the links tab that I'll be sending out, where you guys can go. You can attend a user group in any city right now. Almost all of them are still virtual. And you can just go sign up if you wanted to attend Seattle and see what's going on out there, if you wanted to attend New York City and see what they're working on. There's also these special interest groups, which I think are super cool. There's one about sports that's run by one of my other coworkers, and they have the most interesting guests come and speak, which is tons of fun. I also have been sending out emails. We do have open office hours. So if you guys ever have questions about Tableau, me and Kent and Kristen and Jeremy have opened up our calendars. And if you guys need some help for an hour or so, drop us a line and we'll be more than happy to jump in and provide a quick recommendation or see if there's one of the things that we may talk about in today's talk that we can remind you of. That'll just really help get your workbook over the line. And lastly, there is a Tableau Live event. So there's a digital event going on May 18th. They're going to have a lot of guest speakers. They're going to cover a whole bunch of topics. The link to that is also on the links tab. And Alyssa, is there anything else you wanted to add on that one?
Nope.
Okay. Cool. And then some other dates to look forward to. It'd be our 2 planned talks in June. Kristen is going to cover Server Management 101 and go through some of the things that she discovers on her path to becoming a better server manager and working inside of that Tableau server environment. And then Kent is going to cover for us everything that's new since the last time we talked about things that are new in much more detail. So it will likely cover a lot of the popular and hot new content that's been added to Tableau since 2020.3. And then in October is a surprise. Maybe we're still deciding on it. Maybe I know exactly what it is. Or maybe we're waiting for user feedback from the rest of you guys to decide what it is that, what might be most important to you. And speaking of, I do have a quick link to a Google form that I would love for all of you guys to go and fill out that I've just posted into the Zoom chat. We are looking for some feedback on, how are we doing? How do you guys like this content? And if there's something more interesting you guys would like to know more about. And Nathan has asked, where are my open office hours? So I'll do them digitally. And I have a link that I've been sending out in most of the emails. But Nathan, I'm going to write this down and I'm just going to contact you towards the end of this meeting with a direct link to the office hours form. Cool. And so here is the itinerary for today's talk. And these are the the more detailed bullet points. This is kind of the plan I'm going to follow today as we move around. Is your server on 2020.1? What is the performance recorder? How do I use it? How do you use it on server? And then I want to talk about a little bit the server hardware limits that I've sometimes run into. I'm going to talk about tips inside of the workbook, avoiding repeat logic across calculations, moving some of the like row level calculations out of your Tableau workbooks and onto the data team. They likely belong in your data source. How many marks can I put on one page? We're going to talk a lot about filters and where they should live. The noodle is really new. Should you be using that? Will you have performance increases? And then we're going to talk about live versus extracts on our data connections. This is the tab that I put a lot of those Tableau links, and then one from Interworks that I think I've talked a little bit about. Some of them I have embedded in the tabs down here. But of course, when I make this available, these will all be ready for you guys to click and download. So yeah, let's talk about 2020.1 a little bit. 2021.1. Gosh, I got to get used to saying that. Of course, they're highlighting Einstein in Tableau, Einstein Discovery in Tableau, doing a little bit more with machine learning and data science here. A no-code environment is what they've really been pushing with this product extension here. The other large thing that has come out is QuickLODs. And so I know it's really tiny, it might be hard to see, but they have a little bit, you can click and drag a measure onto a dimension and it will auto create for you the LOD calculations, which is kind of cool. Maybe like a little quality of life improvement, which is pretty nice. Of course, down here at the bottom of the page, we can filter to see those things impacting Tableau desktop specifically. So the QuickLODs and the Einstein Discovery, I felt like were probably the largest things to come in 2021.1. What was that?
I was like, you're just stealing my next talk then. All right, just keep going.
Yeah, Kent's off the hook. Let's talk about performance recordings. Has anyone here, do you guys jump into performance recordings a lot? I don't use them nearly as often as I probably should. So what the performance recorder is there's a little button up here in help. You can go to settings and performance, and down here you can start a performance recorder. And you know, hey, what is it that this thing does exactly? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start a performance recording. And so my Tableau desktop is recording now everything that I do. And I'm going to come over here, I'm going to create a new dashboard really quick. And I'm just going to throw out some of these sheets that I have that we're going to look at in more detail in no particular order. I'm going to come in here into analysis and I'm going to throw a filter in on customer name and another filter in on your ID maybe. And we'll click a couple of them just for fun. And I'm going to come up here to help, settings and performance, and I'm going to stop that performance recording. And so what you guys aren't seeing right now is Tableau is creating a new Tableau workbook, populating it with an extract of information of everything that I just did. And let me change my screen share to here. And so the output is exactly this, where Tableau has made for us a prepackaged workbook that narrates exactly every operation that it just completed, in what order and how long it took. The data set that I'm working with for this workbook is very small and it is very fast. And so it's kind of difficult to see where you might be experiencing slowdown, right? But we can see here this rendering event took much longer than anything we've seen up to that point. And events sorted by time, you can see that rendering the images on the page was the biggest culprit of what drove our workbook. to populate.
And is that, Sean, is that in the timeline? Can we collapse those columns? So could we collapse event down to workbook?
These ones are not
It's not a
collapsible, but you
hierarchy.
can go
Okay.
into the, you do have the sheet here in the timeline where you can drop out these other items, right? So if I wanted to look at just the event by workbook, I could do that, or I could just throw the workbook out altogether. Kind of neat. So again, it'll also have the query in here that it runs. So if Tableau had to go back to your data source to complete any type of computation that it was doing, it would explicitly write out that query right here. This is kind of helpful for creating LODs against custom SQL. It'll kind of do some of the hard work for you. Matt has asked a question. Let's see here. Start the performance, run your query on the dashboard, and it will give you where the slowness is. Yeah, so it will try its best to identify out of the types of events that Tableau processes, which ones took the longest, right? And so you kind of have to extrapolate. It'll take a little bit of self-knowledge here to identify, like, it may not tell you exactly which part of the code is slow. So you may have to run it in parts. Does that make sense, Matt? Big fan of performance recordings. And the good news is that this is not native to desktop. I'm going to switch back to my workbook here. You can do performance recordings on your server environment. This is supposed to scroll, and it won't. That one is now. Well, if I could scroll down, I would. And I would show you that I wonder what's happening here. One second. Well, regardless, there's instructions here that tell you where to go in the settings. So you have to be an admin on your Tableau server, or you'll have to ask your admin on your Tableau server to go and activate the performance recording options. And from there, you can go to the URL for a specific worksheet. You can attach a small snippet of text to the tail end of the URL. And when you refresh the page, there'll be a new button that has the performance recording. It'll be a little stopwatch emoji. And you can click this and you can go into your workbook. You can click some filters, do some of those dashboard actions that might exist, and then end the recording. And it'll output for you what queries had to be run, how long it took, and if it was on the rendering or the calculation of those items. Super helpful. Any questions on performance recording? Cool. Let's talk briefly about Tableau server requirements. And not being able to scroll on this page either. I'm just losing. See if I just remove this and put out a new one with the URL that I want. Ah, there we go. Now we're scrolling. So Tableau has published on its site what the minimum hardware requirements are for a server environment, which it tells you are 4 cores and 16 gigabytes. This is less than ideal. Your Tableau server will operate, it will turn on, but I cannot promise you that any volume of data will be processed or visualized on this server. They further down have a recommended hardware requirement, which is literally double. So 8 cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM. I still think, personally, the 32 gigs is a little low. Ideally, your server environment might have 64 gigs of RAM. But of course, even this could be made better. The virtual environments that exist through VMware and digital hosting and the scalability There's so many dials and switches that can be done. My advice to you is always push your server manager team or whoever manages the server instance to increase resources, be it the compute power or the RAM or the disk space. I know sometimes at different organizations, this is difficult to keep up with. It's hard to track if you don't have any visibility into these areas, right? I know one of the environments that I used to work in, I didn't know that I was breaching the disk space limit until I started getting errors and my workbooks were not working. So things may be working fine, but I would still encourage you to open that conversation with whoever manages your server environment. And you're all going to have a better time if they can get out ahead of hardware requirements.
Yeah, just another quick blurb on the free disk space. I found that, in the server deployment that I had, during setups, I don't know if I left a flag on in a config file somewhere, but we had a bunch of log files that were eating up all of our disk space. And so I was able to get a scheduled task run that flushes those logs every day. But if you're seeing all of your disk space getting eaten up, you might take a look at logs. It's kind of a good bet.
Smart recommendation. You came off mute. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, that has to do with the scheduling. Ideally, you schedule regular backups, and as part of that, you run the cleanup command, which would flush the logs there. And if you were to dramatically increase, say, your number of cores on a server or make big changes there, it would also make sense to revisit your process allocation on the server as far as your process count. We don't have to get into the details of that now, but there are things that you would want to adjust in your settings to make use of new resources on the server if it's been dramatically updated.
Yeah. I guess I may have missed the whole point why server resources are important, is that a lot of the times the errors that I see out in the wild are I've tried to run an extract, but the extract failed. And why is that? And literally is a memory space issue. It is one of the more popular items that I see, along with disk space. I've seen some extracts just take hours and hours to run because the server doesn't have the compute power to churn through all of the information fast enough, and it might hit the timeout error, that extract timeout before it can ever complete. And so obviously, like, unless you have direct ability to control the resources allocated to your server, there's not much you can do here other than just try to start that conversation. All right. And with that, we will dive into the next part of in the workbook. So I took a little bit of time and built a dashboard that I felt like, even with my small data set, we can see about 1 second of lag whenever I activate some of these filters. It was really hard to do, and I tried to deploy some of the worst practices that I've seen to really slow this guy down. And so what we're going to do right now is walk through how to remove some of those items that are slowing this particular dashboard down and get us some speed pickups. So if I come in here and I turn on all of these filters, so what you guys will see is I've put this apply button in here. And so I wanted to call it the apply button specifically because I think it's important. So if your workbook is slow, one of the things you don't want to happen is you don't want to come in here and have your users click a filter and then have it wait 1 or 2 seconds before they can click the next one that they want. So you can you can come into the options here, whoops, the options on this filter, and you can customize and you can check this show apply button box. And what that does is it turns it on here so that your users don't have to wait. But I'm going to turn off these two. I'm going to hit apply, and let's see how long it takes for these changes to occur. So it took less than a second. It was pretty quick, but there was still a moment of lag. And so maybe this infuriates me, and I want to try to do everything in my ability to remove this. The first place that I'm going to look is at the calculations. Well, the first place that we're going to look today, maybe this isn't the first place that I would look, but the first place that we're going to look is into the calculations themselves. So I see that there are 6 measures on this page, and some of them are designed specifically to look at last year's profit, quantity, and sales next to the entirety of profit, quantity, and sales. A very typical ask that I think probably a lot of us have built into our workbooks. So if I go look at this calculation, I'm going to up it up here on the screen. It's a pretty simple calculation that says, hey, look at the year, pull 1 out of the 1 year back off of the max date. And if that is greater than the date and it is less than the current date, then give me the profit. So it's logic like this throughout these calculations that can really drag down our calcs. And so one of the things I want to call out is that integers and booleans are much faster than strings and dates. So what we can do is we can take the logic here. I'm just going to copy it. We're going to come up and create a new calc. We're going to call it last year, question mark. And we're just going to paste this in. Calculation is valid. And what we're going to get is a true false calculated field. And then I'm going to come into my last year calcs, and I'm just going to replace this logic with the last year reference.
While you're doing that, I'd call out that it's more of the gain here is going to be from you're preventing it from running that calculation 3 separate times. So now it just runs that flag once, and then he references that logic in multiple places. Converting it from an if-then statement to a Boolean statement, it does help. But even if his last year calculation had been an if statement, by centralizing that logic would have been very helpful.
Yes. Thank you, Kent. All right. Any questions on?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Your if-then statement, could you use a set for the same scenario? Like if it was in a set, out of a set, does that help or not?
I'm trying to think about.
Sets tend to be static is the issue. So if you do a set that is based upon logic, the set runs effectively globally. So it makes it harder to put into this type of calculation. But if you did have a set that was, say, just a simple Boolean, basically classification of, I don't know, something's in a region or not, you could use it in that calculation. I haven't tested enough that I would say using a Boolean statement versus a set would be dramatically better. Usually the set is harder to maintain and update and doesn't have, say, the dynamic nature as much as like a calculation would be my arguments against it. But it isn't something that would be like blatantly something I would say is a bad idea by any means. If it suits your needs and it works, I would say there's nothing wrong with it, but it does have some limitations on flexibility at times.
That's an amazing answer. Thank you.
If that's non-answer or not, but
no, it's a good answer.
Thanks, Valerie. We got a good question in the chat, and I actually do not know the answer to this one. Is there any performance improvements from using the quick if? So instead of writing the calculations more explicitly like I have here, if then end, Tableau does have a, is it IIF? Yeah, so IIF, where you can put in your logical test, comma, then, comma, else. I'm not sure if this is faster or not.
if it was, I'd put it in the like measurable but not noticeable category of like, there might be a few milliseconds difference here, but I wouldn't expect it to be impactful enough that that's what I would be driving the decision on. It'd be more the benefits of having that third option for null handling would be why I would use that option, but I wouldn't expect a dramatic difference.
Yeah, I think this just it saves you from having to write. So I guess it would be faster in the sense that you don't have to write nearly as many words at a minimum. So sorry, can't get more detail on that one, Dimitri. Ooh, yeah. Also, great question or comment from Connor, and we'll talk about that a little bit. I guess we can talk about that right now, right? So when I talked to Kent about this the other day, he had some opinions about it. And so the question is, when we have calculations running on our table, so every time that Tableau materializes a view, it has to compute these calculations. And when is the right time to recognize, hey, maybe this is something that should be moved back to the data source rather than computed in Tableau, right? Which computational layer do I want this occurring? I think from my perspective, the blanket answer is as much as you can move back to the data layer as possible would probably be ideal, depending on what your compute situation looks like. Some individuals operating in a paid environment, something like Snowflake, where computation costs a whole lot, they may choose to move computation out, or places where it might not be as fast or it might be more obnoxious to edit, you may leave the calculations at the workbook level.
I seem to remember when I used to work for Sean, him yelling at me to stop doing calculations in SQL and do them in Tableau instead.
That's weird.
That's fair. So to kind of distinguish a little bit between them, it would be row level calculations in particular would make sense to move back into the data source. So if it's, say you have an item column and you're doing a calculation that is if item name A, then group 1, if item name B, then group 1, and you've got 100 lines of if then classification that's line by line, that absolutely would make sense to move back into the data source. Aggregate numeric calculations are ones that can be very difficult to do beforehand. So say profit ratio. Depending upon how I filter the view, you would have to sum up profit and sum up sales and calculate the profit ratio. That's a dynamic aggregate calculation that we can't really compute in the data source in advance without computing it for every possible combination of values that we would want to know that metric for. So that doesn't make sense to move back. The last year calculations in particular become difficult if you want to dynamically select dates. So if it's a report that always shows year to date today versus that same date range last year, and we compare only those, then it could make sense to pre-compute it. If you wanted to have the ability to say select a date and say, what about quarter to date, and pick a particular date? Well, that flexibility then is going to blow up the amount of data, different options you'd have to pre-compute. So the last year calculations can work if you don't want to have date selection and be able to kind of flip between different dates, which we can have that flexibility if we do the date logic in Tableau.
Very good explanation. One of the more common row level calculations that I see a lot of the times are trimming names or splitting first names and last names. Right, so maybe the only field that I have available in my data source is someone's first and last name, and so I go in and create a calculation that does like a right trim up to a specific space. And Tableau is going to have to calculate that on, like Kent said, for however many rows exist in this data source. It's going to have to go through and look at that potentially 60,000 times if I have 60,000 rows. All right, moving right along. So let's go back to our workbook now that we've pivoted away from some of the repetitive logic inside of our LOD calculations, I want to talk about filters again for a moment. And one of the options inside of filters, so one of the things I see a lot is that people want filters and they want a lot of them and they want all of them. And when we do that, sometimes we open up the list and there's so many options. And we may just go into our filter and check a box that says only relevant values. This one, whoops, sorry, it took me so long to find that. The only relevant values option. This adds a ton of compute time for all of these filters every time a filter is changed. So what Tableau has to do is, if I came up here and I changed this filter, what Tableau then has to do is look at the physical list that it manifests here and recompute all the options that should be visible inside of it. So removing that only relevant values option can really save a ton of time in the compute power on your dashboard. Now, it won't provide an optimal customer experience because they're going to see a lot of options that don't produce results for given selections. But my advice to you would be, do it where you can get away with it. So in ship mode, I only have 5 options or 4 options. This doesn't really need the only relevant values check. Something like category that only had 3, it probably also doesn't need it. State probably makes sense. Order ID makes sense. Manufacturer, we saw a long list. So that one's going to be kind of to your discretion. It's going to be a blend. And of course, as is with all things, if you can get rid of filters, if you can really say like, hey, do we really need this, and eliminate it, that's even better. And how would you go to that conversation, right? And kind of leads me into my next point is, do I need to populate the state on this page if I know which state I'm looking at? So maybe a conversation could be had for the sake of this dashboard that we instead make this a single select. Like, hey, it turns out that my users, they only need to look at a single value with the option to look at all of them. Or maybe we remove that and we say, no one should be looking at all states in aggregate. So let's come in here and let's remove that all value. And we just want to look at the best state. So now that I know the state is set to Oklahoma, do I really need state in my view? And we achieve a whole lot with this. We reduce the number of marks that Tableau has to render on the page because it's not showing all of the states. And this field becomes largely useless. And so I can come in here and I can just drop, whoops, that's region. I can just drop state off entirely. And I still have the same amount of information that I did before. And so the last part that I wanted to talk about on the workbook front is the number of marks that we render onto the page. So I had hard written down inside of here how many marks that we had displayed. With this little edit to state, making it look at a single state at a time, we dropped the number of marks down from 59,000 to 306 on this page. Over here, we're down to 31, and over here, we're down to 13. So just dramatically reducing the number of physical objects that Tableau has to graphically render on your server or on your local machine. And going back again to the server resource conversation, a lot of the times when I'm building workbooks, I have to be more conscious of the server limitations than on my local machine. It's a sad case sometimes when your local laptop is more powerful than the server environment in which you're having to publish to. So I would say, marks are important when you're considering where your data is going to be consumed. Where is this dashboard going to be visualized? Is it on people's local computers or is it on just your local desktop? Then you're probably fine to only consider your own user specs. But if it's going up onto a server, you're going to have to consider it there.
To call out the server isn't necessarily less performant, It's just the motorcycle versus the bus. You're not the only person on the bus. There's a lot of other things competing for resources on the Tableau
yeah.
server.
Absolutely. Especially if you're trying to look at a dashboard exactly at like 7 a.m., which may be the exact time that all of the extracts on the server are supposed to refresh.
And the comments, I think there's a call out about the action filters. Let's talk about desktop filter or dashboard filter versus a regular filter. I think that the comment there would be like, if you were to say use a sheet to drive the filter selection to filter another sheet, it isn't the filters necessarily faster. It's typically that we then have just fewer objects to render as far as rendering the filter and populating the filter versus populating a sheet that we'll use as an action filter. And the action filter also gives us the ability to kind of return a subset more quickly. It can be certainly faster if instead of, say, loading this giant crosstab right here initially, we instead force the user to select a state from like a bar chart that ranked each state. Then we skip entirely loading the giant version of the crosstab and only load the simplified state-specific version. So there, the action filter could give us, I'd say, the most benefit.
Yeah, and so if anyone missed it, what they're talking about is using this little button right here, the use as filter, to create a dashboard action that will filter the rest of the views on the dashboard. So now that I've selected this on the dash, if I come in and I select one of these points, it's going to filter my 2 other views to give me information only about those items. Cool, good question, Douglas. You know, and also while we're on the topic of filters, there's a lot to do about filters. There are many options about where they can exist in the order of operations. Again, one of my favorite things to do, reference Tableau Desktop official documentation on their website, where they have one of my favorite all-time visualizations, the order of operations inside of Tableau. So the filters that you guys saw us have occur here, dimensional filters. They occur kind of in the middle. Sets, conditional filters, top 10s, and fixed LODs occur right before that. So we can move, we can set a filter to context, which will move it up a tier. And what that looks like is if I wanted to come in here and say region is a contextual filter, it'll turn it gray and move it to the top. You see this little icon next to all of these because I have set them to be data source filters, not to be confused with extract filters, which are separate and different. So if I come over to my data source, I'm operating off of a extract that is a single physical layer inside of this migrated data. And you can see data source filters occur here. And you can see all of the ones I have inside of here. It says 0 because none of them are actively doing anything. But there's another button here called Edit that opens up a different menu. And this is for data extract layers of filters. And so these will occur when the extract is created and never materialize rows into your extract that you don't want it to. So if I didn't want any information from the state of Texas to enter into my data, I could set this data extract filter. I think it went ahead and refreshed for me. So yeah, you just hit refresh or otherwise. And now Texas is not even part of my data block. Oh, I think there it goes. It's thinking about it. Or did I tell it to keep only Texas? I did the opposite. Whoops. So now I know only about Texas, our favorite state, our favorite neighboring state. All right. Moving on to, oh, hold on. Matt has asked a question. Can you use that to pull sample data from a larger database, create your dashboard, then publish the dashboard to work on the full database? Maybe I'm not understanding your question all the way, Matt.
So
So if I may, so like we have databases that obviously probably like you guys, hundreds of thousands of rows of content. But I don't really want to create on that database because it's just lagging like crazy.
Oh, yeah.
What I've done before is I pulled just what you showed is that filter and extracted onto my desktop an X amount of sample data that I'm interested in. And then I used it to create my sheets and my dashboard. But then when I publish it, I change source to the database on the server and publish that work dashboard. It should theoretically, it would still work as I created it without having to quote unquote play on the whole database.
Yeah, so one of the more popular things that I like to do whenever I'm working with a data source that is quite large is exactly what you said, Matt, is I would come in and, as an example, maybe you're working with sales data or something that has any type of date or year associated with it. Be discretionary. Obviously, some things are larger than others. Like oil data, there's like millions of transactions every day. And so maybe you would just set your error. You would come in here and edit, or not edit, you would create a new filter on the date of whichever it is you select, and you would set the limit to like the last 3 hours. Or if it's sales data, maybe you only look at the last 3 weeks, and you would have enough of a sample to build any of your calculations or visuals off of that. And then once you're finished, you can come in here, remove that filter, hit that extract button, walk away, go make some coffee, and then come back and publish.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Just want to make sure if there's a better way, I would love to hear it.
One, if you've got, I think, at least a 2020 version of Tableau Server, is you can publish a live connection and then have the server generate the extract for you. So if it is a large extract that takes a long time to create locally and a long time to publish to the server, you can, on the server, flip back and forth between a live connection and an extract. So you could publish it as, say, develop it against a local extract with a small sample, switch it over to live, publish it, because when it's live, you don't have to like move the entire extract with it, and then tell it to generate the extract locally on the server once it's there. The limitation with that is that if you have a lot of, I think some of the settings in your extract that you can adjust, sometimes it doesn't recognize those when you flip back and forth from live to extract on the server. Has been the only caveat I'd have around that.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Kent. All right, and one of the last things that I wanted to talk about while we're speaking of data structure, I've pulled up this blank page with a whiteboard. I'm going to pull out my drawing tool and do my best to explain this idea because I did not prepare a slide for it. But I wanted to, I've been thinking about this question a lot because it came out in 2020.2, and I'm a huge fan of the Noodle. I love to use the Noodle. I love to talk to other people about the Noodle and try to encourage them to deploy it in their data models. And they always ask me, they say, Sean, why do I even want to use this? And should I even be considering using this? Or is it just going to cause me more headaches? There's a lot of words in here. There's new buttons. And so I've thought about this, and the answer I've come up with is if the Noodle that you create looks something like this, where you have one logical layer connected to one other logical layer, and each of those are just housing a single table, the answer is probably no. I don't think in this scenario that the Noodle is going to help you at all. You're way better off creating just a single layer and doing a join inside of there, traditionally. Now, where I think the Noodle is useful, where you will see physical materialized gains on your dashboards is if your data model looks a little bit more complicated. If you are instead connecting maybe 3 tables together. Now, even with this advanced model, depending on what you're building on your dashboard, it may still not be the optimal solution for you. You may still be better off doing joins. What I have decided is if your dashboard looks anything like the one that we just created, where we had a table on the left and 2 views on the right, you know, a little graph. Maybe this one's a pie. And then we just had lots of lines of text. If, you know, if the dashboard you've created, if sheets 1, 2, and 3 require the layers 1, 2, and 3 in totality, then this is added 0 value. But if even one of these views, so maybe it's this top left one, only requires part 1 and part 2, or sheet 1 and sheet 2, then on the computation of sheet 3, we are not having to even touch table number 3. And we're going to be seeing some performance increases. Now, of course, again, this is all variable depending on the size of the information you have, the types of computations that you're doing, and the visualization on the screen. Does this make sense to everyone, this idea that I've tried to explain with doodle drawings?
Yeah, I had a question about that too. My understanding is that this only helps for live data sources, right? Because if you're extracting, it's just going to extract all those different tables anyway.
Well,
it's querying fewer of them when it's
yeah,
queried.
Go ahead, Kent.
Sorry. So think of it as like multi-table extracts were version 1 of this, because that with extracts can really help when you're joining together multiple tables, even with a traditional join, the multi-table extract. But with this, your query is just hitting fewer columns. It's dealing with less data with an extract. The amount of gain you'll see here, though, is dependent upon as you get a more complex join. If you're joining together like 7 tables, you're likely to see more of a gain than it is with fewer tables. The other scenario where even if you only had 2 tables, where it might make sense to use relationships, is that it allows us to deal with tables of different levels of aggregation. So there it could also be beneficial to use the relationships. So in the past scenarios in which we required a blend to deal with tables of very different data structures, the relationship could be beneficial versus a join. I still lean towards a join and using an LOD to correct for the duplication.
That's usually what we do as well.
But it has more control. The other one is that the relationship defaults to a full outer join, which if you're using row level security, having a full outer join can surprise you and not be what you want. So even if you have your logic for row level security built into your joins, you still need to apply that filter onto the sheet as well, in addition to having your join logic with a relationship where it could return unexpected records.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. Good question, Cody. Thanks for chiming in. All right. And so with my very good doodle drawings, so concludes the majority of the discussion that I've had today. I asked around to some individuals, hey, what are some of the things, and this will be an open question to everyone on the call as well. What are some things that we didn't talk about today or cover in any kind of detail that you guys have seen or encountered or have had to fix or even built yourself that didn't turn out to be as optimal or ideal for the consumer? So some of the things that I have written down as I've asked around to some of my colleagues would be extracts / live connections running against views instead of tables. So Tableau loves to go and rerun those views. And that's just going to put additional stress onto your server and additional computation time into your workbooks. Tables are superior to views. How many sheets is too many? The answer is probably 4. But that just depends on what you're trying to build. Sometimes it's inescapable, but working as a consultant, I've come across quite a few workbooks that a single dashboard has upwards of 20 or 30 sheets. And then we have to get into that rendering conversation. Trying to use Tableau as Excel, again, you're breaching that mark limit. And then you really have to ask yourself, like, what am I even using this tool for? If I needed a spreadsheet. And then one of the things that others have run into is high resolution images, trying to put logos or pictures into dashboards that are super high res. Kent, Kristen, Jeremy, anyone else on the call? Have you guys seen anything outside of what we talked about that you think would be worth mentioning?
Just to piggyback on the sheets thing, this is probably not the biggest call out in the world. How many sheets is too many? I've also seen a lot of workbooks where people have sheets they're not even using in the dashboards because they're using their production workbook as also their development workbook.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That's a pretty big simple fix right there.
Yeah, that's a good
Delete
tip.
them.
I agree. We've had even when you're not showing those sheets, like we have some workbooks on our Tableau server that have 80 sheets in them. And even if you're only displaying one of those sheets or a dashboard with 3 of those sheets, it slows the entire workbook down, even if you never see those sheets or they're not even published. So getting rid of those extra sheets does make a difference. Whoa.
Jeez. That might be a record. I don't know if we should host a competition to see who can get that workbook to load. Like some sort of Tableau strong competition. Cool. Well, we do have 3 minutes left, and I don't know that I ever mentioned that we have 4 Tableau swag gift cards to give away. And what has happened is at some point during this call, our mutual friend Alyssa Jensen from Tableau has downloaded a list of names that I will now plug into this random wheel. An award. Any of you with a $25 gift card to the Tableau swag store.
Can you stream the wheel?
I will once I get the names loaded. It's too embarrassing to share my screen and let you guys watch my mouse just fumble around.
As he puts his name into the list multiple times, right?
Multiple times.
Yeah, so we're throwing your name out, Sean, if it comes back. Spin again.
All right. Now, the list she sent me did not have 36 attendees. But here we are. Let's see here. Cody, are you in there?
I don't. Oh, I am. Okay, it's not
You're in.
alphabetical, I guess. Yep.
It's all over the place. This is a wild wheel of names. I just want to make sure that everyone who participated in the chat at least is in there.
Are we missing Valerie? She asked a question and participated, but I don't think I see her name on there.
It's true.
Yep.
Yeah, but I won last time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Valerie, I don't know. Do you feel like double dipping?
I don't think I should double dip.
Okay. I think that's fair.
Yeah, everyone that participated in chat, I believe, is on there.
I do see
I
my name.
appreciate you saying that though, Kristen, but no doubt in me.
Kristen,
My name is in there. We can
get out of there. You're ruining the odds.
Jeremy's name is in there.
All right. All right, this is it. I'm hitting spin. All right, here we go. Here's the first one up. We've got Jerry. Jerry, I'm gonna push a notification to ask you to unmute. Is that safe?
Woohoo!
There he is. Jerry, can you use the chat to send me a DM with your email?
Sure thing.
Awesome. All right, throwing him out. Bow. All right, who's gonna win the next one? Oh, he was so close.
Matt. Was it Matt? Yes, he's from OU Med too. That's my
Oh, good.
coworker.
Oh, he had to leave early.
He comes to, I think we should give it to him. He comes to all of the meetings, and he's kind of been a Tableau champion at our organization. But if you want to give it to the next person, I won't tell him.
I think it's fair. He stayed until 52. That's fine with me. Kristen, you know him. Send him a internal message at OU and let him know he's won. And then he has to email me.
Okay.
Hooray.
Yay! Hello.
There we go. Awesome. Michelle, can you DM me, please?
Will do. Thank you.
All right. And then the last $25 Tableau swag gift card goes to hooray. We've done it. We've done them all.
Thanks, guys.
Well, yeah, again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's talk, and I hope it was useful. Again, we're always looking for feedback. We are actively trying to create content that you guys care about. So if you have opinions or would like to share something that you've built, please don't hesitate to send us a message and we'll see what we can work out. Thanks for coming.